Today we're going to talk about Balak and Balaam, two interesting people in a very interesting story. It comes from the book of Numbers. We're marching from Egypt with Moses all the way to their destination. They haven't even gotten there yet. We've been in this for quite a few series now, Sundays now, and we're just now getting them close to being into Palestine. But it's all about an interesting character named Balaam and a donkey of his that was a truly unruly donkey. If you're like me, I know I am, and you were a youngster in the 50s or, maybe not quite as old as I am, but maybe then, you might remember Francis the Talking Mule? No?
Yes.
Yeah. I loved it. Every time it came on TV, I was delighted to watch Francis and the Talking Mule. It was a favorite of mine, really. Well, we're going to be talking about a Francis of sorts, a donkey that talked. And you might really think about this as a four-part play, Act 1, Act 2, 3, and 4. Along the way, we're going to meet, we understand Moses and his people. They're on the way. And on the opposite side, we meet Balaam, who was a prophet. His fame had spread all around and everyone knew about him. Balak was the king of Moab at the time. He was very concerned because the Israelites wandered a bit through his province because they're south of all of those places we talked about last week, a bit further south. And the Israelites wandered to get around Moab. They had to walk through his province. And that group of people wandered through, and he didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't stop them. He didn't fight with them in a war. He just let them travel on, but he watched them. He was curious where they were going. And we have a donkey in the story, right? The only donkey in the Bible, as far as I know, that talked. And there was an angel. So what more could you really want from a story, right? You have a prophet, a king, a great leader, a pet animal, and angels. Now, this is one to tell your kids sometimes, right? Well, here's the background. We talked about this part of the story last week. You see the route that they took, and they wandered around the province of Edom. Edom were their cousins, and they weren't quite sure how they felt about each other, and so it was better for them if they didn't even try to go through. But as they came up north, they realized they had to go out into the desert if they were going to keep on their northward journey, so they ventured over toward the left a little bit. They wandered through the province of Moab, and then up to the Amorites. Now, the Amorites didn't like them at all. They could not stand the idea that 1 million people were about to march through their province, so they didn't spend much time up there at all. Then they turned south, and they headed down. And Moab watched all of this. The people at Moab were glad when they cleared their area and glad when they saw them moving up, and the scouts would come back and report to them where all this great number of people were. But at this point in time, just as Moses is ready to go into Israel, Moab takes notice and says, I need to go find out what's going on there. And so it's time for them to consider battling with these people. Now, who is King Balak? Do you know of him? His kingdom relative to Israel, where would it be? If Israel is here, where would Moab be? Here's the river that makes the Palestine over there. Moab would be to the east, right? It would be up here, right here, or down here. You don't know? You got to get all these places straight, because that's important to know that. Moab is down here. It's in the southern part, in the desert part. The Midianites really are in the area that we're talking about here. Midianites. Well, Balak was the king at that time of the people who were Moabites. Balak has a name that means destroyer. That's a great name for a king, isn't it? The destroyer. Balak was I got this totally wrong in my notes here. I can't read that. The king of the Moabites was a truly mighty warrior. He didn't bother the Jews, of course, but after they defeated two kings to his north, when they had the battles up at the north, those kings that they defeated were like 14 feet tall. I mean, huge, tall people. And when they fought those people, then Moab began to take interest in what was going on. How could a group of wayfarers topple two friendly kings who lived relatively close to him? The king, Balak, knew that sooner or later he would be next, and I'm sure he was quaking in his boots because of what this group of people were able to do. He said to himself, this horde, or this group of people, is going to lick up everything around like an ox licks up the grass of a field. And so he said, I need to take action. So the next character we meet in this story is Balaam. And the Torah notes that he's not an Israelite. He's a foreigner. And he was a diviner, a person that could tell the future. The king Balak finds him near the Ethiopian river. And he had been hoping to find him because he'd heard that Balaam could put spells on people or hex them in some way and drive them away. There are things you may not know about Balaam, and some of the things that I didn't know quite a bit about. He lived among idolaters, but he professed belief in the singular God, similar to what the Jews were bringing into the area. He claimed already to have great knowledge about the Jews' God. He was an Ethiopian living in Midian near the Ethiopian river. His father's name was Beor, and he lived in a city named Pethor, which was on the bank of the great Euphrates. Joshua tells us he was a soothsayer, someone who could look into the future and soothsay. Joshua also tells us he was a prophet among the Moabites and the Midianites, and he could bless people simply by his words. So his brother Bela was a king in Ethiopia. Now God sets him on a different course with a 360-degree turn, doesn't he? He was headed in one direction, and God said, no, I don't want you to go that direction. I want you to turn around completely. 360-degree turn. He was wanted by God to curse King Balak and the Moabites instead of his children, Israel. So what do you suppose King Balak knew about the Israelites? What do you think they knew? Well, he knew that they were a great nation. They had come from Egypt. They were escapees. They were trying to get away. That they were enormous in number. They were huge. They covered the land, so the Bible says. He also knew that they'd settled next to him and that they were on his doorstep. He knew that his people were afraid of him. So all of that put together forced him to think, I need to take action, and I need to do it now. But what do I do? What do I do? You would think he would go get an army, wouldn't you? And come up against 1 million people and see if he could conquer them like no one else had been able to do. But that's not what he did. He went a different route. He sent elders of Moab and Midian up to meet them. They brought money with them for Balaam. He decided, instead of going to war with these people, I'm going to go find Balaam and let Balaam take care of it. Balaam could curse the Israelites and take care of them for me. Basically, he wanted so that he would curse them so that he could destroy them with his military might. Well, we know whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed, so the first delegation told him. And they told him that our king has a need that you can solve. So Balaam's quite a pickle. Here's Balaam. He's caught between two sides. God, who's Israel's awesome God, did not take kindly to the notion of Balaam cursing his people. And Balak is sending a delegation to ask him to do that very thing. And he's not sure what to do. It should have been a no-brainer, right? How could he even contemplate cursing the Jews? What could he have been thinking? God clearly gives him his marching orders here. He tells Balaam to go back home and leave my people alone. So, almost immediately after the failure of the first delegation to Balaam, Balak sends another delegation, a second group of people. Now this one was made up of mighty dignitaries, all of the rich people. He gathered a handful of them and sent them to talk to this crazy guy and all the people, Moses and all the people that are with him. And he went to Balaam to convince him to plead with Balaam to curse the people. Balaam holds steadfast. There's not enough money in the world to do that, he said. I am not going to curse these people. You couldn't offer me enough money to make me do what God's already told me not to do. And through all of this, Balaam has been asking God for help. And what should I do? What should I do? And God told him in no uncertain terms not to go with them. You would think that would have been the end of the story, right? The story ends right there, but that's not the way it is. Have you ever told your children no, and they do exactly what you don't want them to do? Well, like an unruly child, he persisted. Of course you did. You got children, right? He persisted, asking God to be allowed to curse him. But because of his persistence, God finally agreed and provided two conditions. Okay, you can go do whatever you're going to do under two conditions. First of all, the leaders must be the ones who come to you and ask you to go curse the people. Secondly, only do what I tell you to do. When you get there, you won't know if you'll be able to or not. Do what I tell you to do. Two things he had to do. Do you think he did either or both of those things? No? Otherwise, the story would end right here, wouldn't it? No, he doesn't. Just as children do, Balaam didn't do what God wanted him to do. Instead, he did what he wanted to do. God told him, you can only go if they, the leaders, call for you. And you must do only what I say. Balaam, we will see, did neither one of these things. He didn't wait until the leaders called for him. He actually went and met with them. And then secondly, he didn't do what God told him to do. God knew that beforehand, though, right? This is God's plan, that Balaam would be true to his character and do what he did. If you look up faux pas in the dictionary, you should see a picture of Balaam, honestly. Apparently, we can only surmise Balaam did not wait for the leaders to come, to ask him to come and curse these people. God wanted them to ask him in person simply because it would be the most humbling thing those leaders had ever had to do. Those leaders were people who would say, I want something to happen, and that's all they needed to say. It would happen. But here, they got this contrary prophet who would not do what they would tell him to do. He just wouldn't come to them, even talk to him. So they had to go see him. God wanted these leaders to walk through the camp all the way to the edge of the camp, go up to the mountain and meet with Moab and let all of the people see them do that. But Balaam didn't let that happen. Now, that is why God was angry at Balaam. Why do you think people do what they do? Why did Balaam do what he did? Some people do things for money. Some people do anything for money. Some people wish for prestige, appearing before leaders of the people, doing something big. Some people do things for the power that it gives them. And his own desire to curse those hated Jews probably was pushing him hard, or thinking, if God is allowing me to go, then surely he intends for me to curse those Israelites, right? It could be that. We just don't know what his motives were. More than likely it was a reward he was hoping for, prestige or power. More than likely it was that. And God knew what his tendencies were. And we also know what happens on the way. A very interesting story. I feel very sorry for the donkey. He sets off in his finest clothes. He's feeling all high and mighty. I've got these people who want me to come and do something wonderful for them. How important I am. I'm the only one who can do what I'm about to go and do. I am an important man. But on the way, he's in his Lexus. He's on his donkey, and the donkey sees an invisible angel standing in the way. He doesn't see the angel. He doesn't know what's going on. But the donkey's smart enough to know, I should not proceed any further. There's an angel up there flashing a sword in front of me. So eventually, he gets a beating. And the donkey does, and falls down on the ground like you or I might. And it makes Balaam so angry. He can't believe the audacity of this donkey not to do as I've requested him to do. Maybe he is so mad at the donkey, that's why he can't see the angel. Maybe he can't see the angel because God didn't want him to. But whatever the thing, the donkey didn't follow Balaam's lead. He turned off to go into a field. Balaam beat him to get him back on the road. The donkey brushed up against a wall and crushed Balaam's ankle. That made him really mad. For this, he got another beating. And on the third attempt, the donkey just dropped down on the ground. Again, he got a third beating. That poor donkey. Have you ever been so mad at an animal you shouted at him as if he could understand English? he would respond? I know I have. After the beating he got from the Balaam, the donkey asked in perfect Hebrew, "What did I do to deserve this?" And this amazing thing didn't even faze Balaam. I mean, there's no indication in the Bible that Balaam thought it was odd at all that this donkey was talking to him. But here's a donkey talking to him. Getting a beating. Now, I'm reminded of the movie The Christmas Story, right? That little boy, that poor little boy is up there, and you can hear him. His dad's taking care of him, and he's saying, "What did I do, Dad? What did I do?" Well, it was what the donkey was feeling, pretty much the same way. So with everyone watching, Balaam engages in a very logical discourse with this donkey. But I've done the same sort of thing with dogs and parrots in my house, and cats, right? I talk to them just like they can understand English, and assume that they did. Well, Balaam is so mad. Honestly, the Bible says he gives no indication that he was really surprised that that donkey could talk to him. The angel steps in front of him. The donkey sees it. Balaam doesn't. It generates even more whippings. And finally, his eyes are open, and he saw the angel. He had the right response, though. Balaam fell down and bowed low. And the angel asked him, "Why are you beating this animal? If the donkey had not turned away, you would have died, and the donkey would be okay. And this is the path you're on." Think about it, Balaam. This is the path you're on. If you don't turn away, this is what's going to happen to you. Do you think he apologized? Do you apologize to the angel? Apologize to the donkey? I think he was just too afraid to do much of anything, really. It's interesting that the king traveled to the very edge of his territory to meet with Balaam, and he chastised the man for not coming when he was called. Well, I can understand why he didn't come, but eventually Balaam does decide to go to him because he'd asked God if it was okay. Balaam made it very clear that he had to say only what his Lord told him to say. Do you think he meant that? You think he was happy about that? I'm sure he had other things he was going to say, but he had to tell a story that was completely different, 360 degrees from what he intended to do when he went there. The group goes to a high mountain from which they can see 1 million people spread out below them. Sheep and cattle, a horde of Israelites. 7 altars are built and burnt offerings are made up there on the mountain. Balaam was a God worshiper. He really was. Then Balaam had some bad news. The people are sacred to God. They're set apart. They're numerous. Sounds more like a blessing. The king can hardly believe his ears. You're blessing them still? You're up here with me and you're blessing these people. A second offering is made. God tells Balak to report that Jacob will receive no misfortune or misery. In other words, Israel should receive no misfortune from you. They were brought out of Egypt for a purpose. No one will speak a divination against them. They are a lion. So the king pleads with him. If you're not going to curse them then, at least please don't bless them. It appears that Balaam has learned his lesson by this time. So they go to a third location, and without offerings, Balaam offers a benediction on behalf of them to the Jews. Praise and poetry. They're tall, beautiful to God. They will be exalted. Whoever blesses them will be blessed. If you curse them, you will be cursed. I will speak what I am told. Balak wants very much to kill man, but hesitates simply because he's seen enough to fear killing a man who has a relationship with the Hebrews' God. So a fourth oracle is offered. It's a benediction in advance of the coming of Jesus. If you read that part of it, you get a glimpse of what's going to happen in the future when Jesus comes. He is a star, and he has a scepter. In other words, he is a king. Jesus is going to be a king, and he will crush Moab, Edom, and Israel will thrive. That's basically the message that Balaam offered to King Balak. Israel will thrive. It's possible that some of Balak were Amalekites. Now, they're all the time most hated, villainous people who the Israelites struggle with from the time of Moses all the way up to almost the time of King Herod. Balaam said that they will be destroyed. It was a prophecy that was made. And it's an interesting story that seems to culminate, you think, with King Saul. He went down to destroy them. But did he totally destroy them? He didn't do what God wanted him to do. And we're going to go through that story. It's an interesting story. And even today, the Amalekites are remembered in the Jewish prayers. When he looked and saw the Kenites with the king, Balaam offered an oracle for them. You will possess the land of Petra and live high among the beautiful red cliffs. I can't wait until we talk about that story so you can see those castles that they built in the side of a mountain. You can even go there today. The University of Arkansas has a direct relationship with them. And Balaam offers a final oracle. He says something about Asher and Eber. They will subdue Asher and Eber, and then they will come to ruin. We're not quite sure what that means. Probably it means that they will be subdued by the Greeks and then later by the Romans. That's probably how you would interpret that. So, poor Balak, he hoped for cursing all the people, but he got none. He didn't get to curse them at all. Instead, he got to offer a blessing. He wanted blessings for his people, but instead they received cursing. So the story ends with a fizzle and not a bang. Both men leave each other, headed for different destinations. Is that the last we hear of Balaam in the Bible? He passes out without any reckoning? No, you're wrong. Number one, Jude mentions him and warns us to run away from money, just like Balaam was running toward it. Peter tells us not to love money in the way of Balaam. And so he's mentioned a couple of times in the New Testament. He's mentioned in Jude not to run toward the reward. The love and pursuit of money is a dangerous thing. Thank you, folks, for listening. Appreciate you. And we'll be here next Sunday.